It's recording. I make it 8 o'clock, so I'll get started. So good evening. Thank you all very much for joining the webinar this evening. This is something that I've put on just to sort of help well, as many runners as possible with their sort of race day nutrition for any upcoming races. So I know at the time of recording, there's the Housestead Marathon coming up in a few in a few days' time, I should say. But then equally, if you're watching this on catch up, if you're watching this back, maybe a few weeks, few months later, the content is still going to be sort of helpful, beneficial towards your race day performance too. The reason why I've sort of put this together, at time of recording, I've just spent a week at the London Marathon Expo with Beat It Sport, and part of my role there is having a lot of nutrition conversations with runners of all levels and abilities. And even with a few days to go, over the years, I've been there every year for about the past 7 years, and over the years, I've had conversations with so many runners where you sort of say to them, right, talk me through your nutrition strategy, and they just look at me very, very blankly. And the trouble is, within a few days' time, or less than a few days, they're then about to run 26 miles. And this applies to any distance, any event as well, where often nutrition is almost a bit of a sort of bodge job. I'm not saying that's for every runner, but based on experience, a lot of runners don't have that nutrition strategy in play, and it's often their nutrition that then stops them performing at their best. And so there's a number of common sort of mistakes that runners make, which I'll sort of address as part of what I'll talk about in this webinar. So the first one I'd say is the underfueling. So underfueling in the days before the event, where they don't carb load effectively. A lot of runners I speak to will try and carb load the night before, where they think that basically they need to consume as much pasta as they physically can. But this is definitely not the case. A more effective strategy is to build this up, and I'll talk more about this in a moment. As I mentioned, not having a race day nutrition strategy. This is something that a lot of runners do get very wrong. The adrenaline, the emotions of the day, that nutrition strategy that they may have trialed, practiced during their training, just goes out the window. I speak to a lot of runners who train where they say to me, they fuel by distance. So they say, oh, I'll have a gel every 5K, 8K, something like that. And if they're maybe, I suppose, a more experienced runner who will hit that distance in the sort of consistent time. So, just for argument's sake, let's say they run 20-minute, 25-minute 5Ks. On that basis, if they're having a gel every 5K, every sort of 20, 25 minutes or so, they're still hitting a sort of decent amount of carbohydrate in their sort of per hour there. Whereas as I experienced sort of the London Marathon at time of recording was a week ago, I had a lot of runners reach out to me in the follow up where they were like, I felt awful, I felt tired, I felt sick, and when they sort of talked me through their fueling, they just got tired, and because they were fueling by distance, it was essentially they were running for longer because they were tired, they were slower, and it meant that they were massively under fueling there. Third one is then trying something new. I know this is probably the most common thing that's drilled into a lot of people, but again, I still get runners come to me and they say, I've trained with this food, this drink, and in a race day, I had something completely different. And that could be as I spoke to someone or I spoke to a few runners quite recently, that was changing, having a completely different pre-run or pre-race meal that they've never had before, which did not end well for them, as you can probably imagine. Equally, for some runners, it's then having a different brand of gel that they're used to. For some runners I've spoken to, it's then they've had a handful of sweets from the crowd, the supporters, and obviously what they're doing there, it's a great source of support, but sometimes things like that can often hinder your race day nutrition there. And of course, I suppose as well as in the days leading up, it's then not eating enough either on on the morning of, and then often in the race itself. I mean, for some of you that are joining, where you're maybe doing sort of 10Ks, something like that, the fueling during it is a little bit, in terms of requirements, is a little bit different. Maybe not as essential, but for those that are maybe doing half marathon distances, this does make a huge difference here. As well as not eating enough, it's then the hydration, or I should say lack of hydration, that then also has a huge impact here as well. And so this is what I'm going to address in some of these some of these points that I'll share a little bit more around tonight. For those of you that are watching this webinar, you've not sort of met me before, not seen me before, just as a short introduction, my name's James. I'm a registered performance nutritionist. I work across a variety of different sports, competitive levels from sort of elite to amateur. And more recently, I suppose through my own running journey, I founded Fuel the Runner. So Fuel the Runner is more of, I suppose, a nutrition education, nutrition support program for runners of all levels and abilities to help them run, perform at their best by optimizing an effective nutrition strategy. As I mentioned, nutrition is something that I specialize in as a registered nutritionist, and then through my own running journey. So back in 2019, I got a place in the London Marathon, and it was only through my own training, my own sort of experience that I started to realise that there was just such a lack of nutrition support out there. So even now, there's lots of runners who or lots of runners who are training, following various sort of plans, programs, and things like that, which is great. But the trouble is, if your training expenditure or energy expenditure each day is like up here, but your nutrition or energy intake is down here, that difference between the two, that's what results in sort of injury and illness, and can obviously impact race day performance. Hence the focus of this webinar. So in today, I'm really going to talk about nutrition in terms of three parts. I'm going to talk about nutrition in the days before the event. I'm going to talk about nutrition on the day of the event, and I've really broken this down into sort of two sections. So part one is then on sort of the morning of the race, and then part two is then during the race itself. So the content for this, I should say, is tailored more to those that are doing sort of half marathon and marathon distances and beyond. If you're doing 10K or less, again, what you do in the days leading up to and on the morning is still really important, but requirements during the race are maybe a little bit different here. And then I'll also be offering a sort of open Q&A afterwards, after I've sort of finished doing the sort of main content as well. If you're watching this on as a catch up or as a catch up and a replay, if you do have any questions based on anything I've said, please do feel free to drop me a message on the sort of Fuel the Runner social media pages. So either a Facebook message, an Instagram message. A lot of runners do that already, which is great. The inbox is always open, or if you prefer, you can see the Fuel the Runner email address there as well. So it's entirely up to you what you prefer. When it comes to nutrition, so some of you may have seen this slide before, but I think it is really important to, I suppose, come back to it, highlight this, and just as a bit of a reminder, for me, I often say nutrition is just a very small part of a runner's development, but it's something that plays a huge impact in terms of all aspects of our running performance. So, what we eat and drink is going to have a huge impact on race day, like I say. It's then going to impact our recovery. So, how quickly you recover, ready for your next training session, your next race. It's going to impact things like your training adaptation. So, over the years, I've had so many runners where they say to me, I'm training, I'm running 3, 4 times a week, I'm going to the gym twice a week, and so on, but they're not actually getting any further, seeing any progress. And quite often, it's that lack of nutrition or lack of an effective strategy that's maybe stopping this from happening. Nutrition also plays a key role in terms of injury prevention, and obviously, worst case scenario, if an injury was to occur, it also helps with that rehabilitation too. So, an effective nutrition strategy, getting plenty of protein, all these different vitamins and minerals is going to help reduce muscle soreness and inflammation here as well. Outside, I suppose, outside of the running performance as such, nutrition plays a key role in terms of our overall health and well-being. So maintaining things like a strong immune system, maintaining that sort of focus, that concentration, that it is also very key, and that's something that a lot of runners tend to overlook or don't necessarily think about when it comes to nutrition. A lot of runners maybe think about the fueling beforehand, but all the rest of it tends to sort of go out the window. As I say, for the purpose of this evening, or the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to focus on the race day performance. And of course, the first thing I'm going to start with is the sort of days before the event. So I don't want to sort of overload everyone with loads of information. Still, I'm going to focus on a few sort of a few key areas here. And so, like I say, when it comes to sort of fueling before a marathon, half marathon distance and beyond, really your fueling starts the days leading up to it. So this is where I'm sure we've all come across things like carbohydrate loading. As I mentioned, a lot of not just runners, athletes across a variety of sports think it's all to do with like the meal the night before, where they try and consume as much pasta as they possibly can until they feel very, very sick. One, it's very ineffective because you're not actually loading those glycogen stores. Two, all it's going to do is just make you feel very sort of heavy, bloated, tired, fatigued, and could impact your performance the next day. So, just to highlight a little bit more about why the days before are so important. Within the body, carbohydrate is stored within the muscle and liver as glycogen. So, glycogen, if you imagine our glycogen stores, it's a little bit like the battery on your phones. Obviously, the more we use our phone throughout the day, the more that battery level depletes until it goes into sort of low power mode. And that's basically what's happening in the body here. So, providing we fuel effectively in the days leading up to a long endurance event, we have enough energy storage for around 90 minutes to 2 hours worth of high intensity exercise. So, as I mentioned, if you're running sort of 10K events, anything like that, you should be fine. There's no need to take on any additional fuel, but also very important to make sure you fuel effectively before. If you're taking on sort of distances longer than this, so going for sort of marathons, half marathon distances, anything sort of 2 hours and beyond, this is where the fuel enduring is also going to be really key. If we can then start to essentially increase and optimize our sort of glycogen stores ready for the start of the race, it just means we're going to get to the start line and our energy stores are going to be sort of nice and topped up. So again, a bit like you might charge your phones overnight. So when you wake up in the morning, unplug it and it's good to go for the day. This is really what we're trying to do within the body, like I say. And so carb loading really starts around 3 days or sort of 48 to 72 hours before the start of the event itself. So if you're going to run on a Sunday, this is really from the sort of Thursday onwards. You start to not go crazy, and it's not a case of eating every single thing in sight, but you're starting to incorporate or choose more of these carbohydrate based snacks and sort of meals in your diet. To give you an idea, from when you sort of look at the research around sort of carbohydrate loading and recommended amounts, within the world of sports nutrition, we focus on this. I suppose using sort of relative amounts. So this idea of grams per kilogram of body mass rather than sort of absolute amounts. So rather than me saying, right, you need 500 grams of carbohydrate today, or 500 grams on this day, and 100 grams on this day, that's going to have very different impacts. Instead, what I'd be saying to you is working it out yourself. So multiplying your body weight by the recommended amount will give you a sort of total figure for that day. To give you an idea, what you can see on in the table on the screen is, I suppose, at either end of the spectrum. So, if you're aiming somewhere between that 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass in those days, if you're going for the sort of lower end of the recommendations, around 8 grams, as you sort of look down. So, if you're a 70 kilogram runner, for example, this is about 560 grams of carbohydrate. For maybe a sort of slightly heavier runner that's around 100 kilos, this is about 800 grams of carbohydrate. So I should say this is not 800 grams of pasta, this is 800 grams of carbohydrate. What that looks like in terms of food, it sometimes becomes quite a significant amount of food to consume in order to hit these targets. And I'm going to talk more about this in a moment. At the higher end, you can obviously see the recommendations there for the sort of 12 grams per kilogram of body mass. So again, same thing as you sort of scroll through the numbers. For some of the sort of heavier runner, that's going to be about 1.2 kilos plus in terms of carbohydrate as those recommended guidelines. Can this be done? Absolutely. Probably one of the most not mistakes, but one of the most common things I see, particularly in the build up to some of these events, is when people say they're struggling to get this quantity in. Can you do it? Absolutely. But the trouble is they focus on a lot of I'd probably say almost like wrong foods or wrong processes to an extent with this. So to further help you with this, as a starting point, in terms of like whole meals and things like that, obviously I'd be choosing the sort of carbohydrate based options, so pasta dishes, rice dishes, potato dishes, you could use things like porridge, cereal, pizza. So, like a bowl of cereal the night before you go to bed, for example, it's like a pre-bed snack. It could be that throughout the day you snack on bagels and wraps with some like chicken salad in, for example. It could be that you have a jacket potato. It could be that you boil some new potatoes, things like that. But these would obviously form a basis of your sort of meals throughout the day. But then to help further increase your sort of carbohydrate intake, you could then use additional snacks, which are more on the sort of right hand side. So snacks and drinks, whether it be cereal bars, fruit, so something like a medium sized banana, you're going to have somewhere around the 30 to 60 grams, 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrate, depending on the size of the banana there. Same thing with your cereal bars, depending on the brands. Even using like jams and condiments. So if you have your toast, a slice of toast with some strawberry jam or marmalade, whatever you prefer, it's just a really simple but very effective way to get quite a significant amount of carbohydrate into your diet, essentially. Other options could then be things like juices and smoothies. So, fruit juices, fruit smoothies, whether it be the pre made ones, the ones you make yourself where you blend up, whatever you prefer, it's entirely up to you. I should say I'm not encouraging you to sort of have sugar all the time, but when it comes to sort of food and nutrition choices, it is very much around this idea of context and understanding what's going to be the most appropriate food or drink in that particular situation. In this situation, in the build up to races, using these snacks, excuse me, using these snacks and drinks would certainly be recommended there. So that gives you a few tips to focus on or think about in the days leading up to the event. One thing I sort of didn't put in that slide deck is, of course, the importance of staying hydrated. Again, you don't necessarily have to go sort of crazy with this. You do not need to consume a million electrolytes or anything like that, but making sure you are consuming plenty of fluid each day is really key. I mean, as a good guide, recommendations here would be around 35 milliliters per kilogram of body mass. So multiply your body weight by 35, and this will give you a rough target. So just for ease of maths, if you're a 100 kilo athlete, multiply it out. That's about 3.5 liters to try and consume on those days as well to ensure you are sufficiently hydrated. The second area, though, to focus on is then, of course, the race day morning and sort of fueling before the event itself. Again, when it comes to fueling for the race, this really starts around 2 to 3 hours before. So, this is a really important opportunity. So, one, it's a chance to consume a substantial meal, but it also allows the time for the body to digest and process that meal. Again, I had a good 10 or 15 runners that I spoke to at London Marathon Expo who were basically saying that they felt really sick, but when you asked them about their sort of process, their strategy, they were eating probably an hour or so before starting to run, and when they were trying to consume a huge bowl of porridge, and it's just such a lot of food that's probably still sat on the stomach, hasn't been digested, and that's what probably made them feel quite unwell. And this is where we start to get into the realms of runner's gut, which I'm sure you've all heard of. If you haven't heard of runner's gut is basically this sensation of where when you start exercising, you start running, you feel really sick, really unwell, and quite often it's not just food, but quite often it's because people have not maybe allowed sufficient time in between sort of exercise and having something to eat. In terms of guidelines and recommendations here as to how much, basically how much we require will depend on the time available. So, like I say, fueling starts 2 3 hours before. So as the time available to the start of the race decreases, so should the sort of amounts that we consume. So if you've got like 4 hours available, aim for around 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass in that pre-exercise meal or pre-run meal. If you've only got an hour or so, aiming for essentially a gram per kilogram body mass gives you a fairly good sort of guideline, a good idea. Here, what we want to do is just focus on the carbohydrate-based meals and snacks that are low in fat, low in fiber. So, what I'm in here in this situation, this is where I'd be maybe switching away from like the whole meal, the whole grain varieties of these different foods to things like your white bread, your white toast, your white pasta, your anything like anything like that that's just going to give you a really quick release of carbohydrate, a really quick release of energy is going to be really key. To give you some examples of what this might then look like, so this is by no means a definitive list, but some examples might be something like a bowl of porridge. So, bowl of porridge, we've got that nice carbohydrate coming from the oats, and then for some additional flavour and equally a top up of those quick release carbohydrates is then the fruit. So we've got some strawberries, raspberries, and blueberries on top, and there's it's a bit hard to see in the image, but there is then some honey. So again, like I say, with the condiments, very simple, very effective. If you're someone that's not a big fan of porridge, you could use things like Weetabix. So again, one or two Weetabix biscuits with your choice of toppings, or equally, you could use a bowl of cereal. So if you prefer a bowl of cornflakes, a bowl of Rice Krispies, and so on, you could use that as well, not a problem. In terms of pasta dishes, so I know some runners will have pasta sort of in the morning, and that's absolutely fine. A lot of this is finding what works for you essentially. Um, if you are going to use pasta, one thing to bear in mind is please think about what you're going to have with your pasta. As in, if you're having it with a load of like cream and cheese, so if you're having like a pasta carbonara, for example, this is going to take longer to sort of digest and process within the body. So this could increase that risk of runner's gut. So in this case, I'd be focusing on those in a sort of tomato and vegetable based sauce instead. Other options could be things like slices of toast with peanut butter and sliced banana if you prefer like more of a sort of high energy snack that doesn't result in having to consume sort of loads of food. Other options could be things like jacket potatoes. Again, every runner is very different. I appreciate you might not necessarily want a jacket potato on the day of your race, particularly a sort of morning race. But again, it just gives you a bit of variety there. If we fueled ourselves effectively in the days leading up to the race, really the purpose of what you eat before your exercise is just topping up. We're just starting the race as close as possible to full without feeling really sort of uncomfortable and feeling really sick. Again, as I mentioned, having some additional sort of snacks in the build up to the start of the race can also give you a sort of quick release source of energy ready for the start. So again, what you do here, it's entirely up to you. But some runners quite like a bowl of yogurt with a handful of fruit. Again, it's your choice what you want to add. Some will then have will have sort of pieces of fruit. So bananas are probably the most popular or most common option. So a sort of large banana, you've got somewhere between 30 to maybe 50 grams of carbohydrate there, depending on the size. In terms of cereal bars, you don't have to use Rice Krispie Squares, other brands are available. But again, they are very palatable, they're very popular. If you prefer using a different brand of cereal bars, that is absolutely fine too. In terms of sports drinks, some people will use not just Lucozade, but you might use like Tailwind. Some of you might use things like SIS Beta Fuel. Again, part of your training is really sort of nailing and practicing that nutrition strategy. But again, these are just a really quick, easy way to get additional fuel, additional carbohydrate into the body ready for the start of the race. Smoothies, for me, smoothies are probably one of my sort of go-to options just because they are really quick, they're easy to consume. Um, they're easy to consume, so you can sort of add the ingredients of your choice, and depending on your goal, you could sort of tailor these for like a pre-exercise smoothie or pre-exercise sort of fueling option. Equally, a very effective post-exercise recovery option too. As we move on to focus during the race itself, so we fueled ourselves effectively. We're at the start line. We've had our sort of breakfast, our pre-run meal. We've got those energy levels right up here, and we're sort of ready to go. During the race, like I said, now I'm really focusing more on the sort of half marathon distances and beyond. When it comes to fueling during the race, it's really easy to become overwhelmed over or focus on some of the other things, the crowd, the atmosphere, the sort of mood, the mindset, the weather can obviously have a huge impact here. One, if you are going to be running though for sort of an hour or above, which a majority of runners do, it's going to mean that you will need to take on some form of fuel during your sort of runs or during your training. During your race. In terms of guidelines, in terms of recommendations, guidelines suggest at least 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour for any runs over an hour. For runs 2 hours and beyond, this is where it's recommended closer to that sort of 60 grams of carbohydrate. For those of you that are running a lot faster and maybe you're targeting maybe a sort of sub 330 sort of marathon, sub 330 pace, this is where additional guidelines also recommend or have found consuming closer to sort of 90. Well, even now, if some of you have been reading sort of in the news over the past sort of week or so, 90 grams of carbohydrate plus per hour can also provide additional benefits here as well. What's really important if you are going to go to the higher targets, anything from, I'd probably say for most runners, anything from sort of 80 grams of carbohydrate beyond, it does require some pre-exercise or pre-race gut training, and that's basically in the weeks in the build up to your race. It is basically practicing, trialing, gradually increasing how much you are taking on per hour, just to help your stomach manage this. If you're someone that usually has, let's say, 50 grams of carbohydrate per hour, so maybe 1 or 2 gels an hour during your races or during your runs, you then try to get to sort of 100 grams per hour, there's a good chance this will not end well. So if you do have a race coming up at the weekend or fairly soon, I would not be sort of trying this. I would stick to what you're used to. And then once you've had your sort of recovery time, maybe training for your next event, that's something you can then incorporate as part of your training in the build up. And if you need help with this, please do reach out, and that's a separate conversation we can then have. Just to show you what this looks like. So this is really, I suppose, a sort of minimum. If you are going to be running for sort of 2 hours and beyond, I'd be trying to sort of focus closer to the sort of 60 gram mark there. So, but just to give you an idea, 30 grams of carbohydrate. This is the equivalent to a 500 milliliter bottle of Lucozade Sport. It's the equivalent to 1 to 2 energy gels, depending on the brands that you have. So some gels will be around 18 to 20 grams of carbohydrates. Some gels are at the higher end, around 40 grams. So you do need to check the packaging that you're using. If you were trying to sort of increase this, obviously, to sort of 60 grams, you would then double the quantity of these items that you're having each hour to help you hit those targets. But some runners will then use fruit. Again, bananas are very popular, or equally dried fruit, dried apricots, sultanas, raisins, things like that. Cereal bars, again, choose the brand of your choice. Some runners, or some of you might prefer to use sort of the powdered fuel option. So as I mentioned, Tailwind, SIS beta fuel, or even things like sweets. So 30 grams of carbohydrate is roughly the equivalent to about 8 or 9 jelly babies, or one of those little. If you buy like the multi-pack share bags of like Haribo sweets, one of those bags, 1 to 2 of those bags, is about 30 grams of carbs there too. As I mentioned, if you are hitting those sort of higher targets, or trying to hit those higher targets, target the faster pace, it's absolutely doable. You just have to think about the quantity of food that is required. So, using those same examples, if you're trying to hit 60 grams an hour using the liquid options, it is possible, but it means you've essentially got to have a litre of Lucozade Sport every hour. It means you've got to be having at least 3 energy gels every hour as well. In terms of the powdered fuel options, again, sometimes this is where it gets sort of quite messy. So, at the London Marathon, for example, I've seen a lot of runners that will run with it in like little sachets, little packets, but they're trying to run whilst pouring the mixture into their water bottle. But the trouble is, those water bottles, they're not 500 milliliters; they're usually about 250-ish. So then the ratios are a little bit off there as well. So I hope that has sort of been quite useful. Like I say, it's for me, it's your nutrition, or it's a runner's nutrition strategy that can be the difference between them hitting a PB at their race, or them having to keep stopping for a P essentially. Um, I have seen it over the years, and as I mentioned, this is part of the reason why I've created Fuel the Runner, is to try and help runners of all levels and abilities to optimize their nutrition so they can push themselves further, they can get more out of their sort of running and training. So, just to sort of wrap this up, then before we take any questions, I always like to finish my presentations with some tips. So the first one I'll start with is the fueling side of things. When it comes to fueling, the fuel that you put into your body is going to have a huge impact on the performance that you get out of it. So making sure you are fueling your runs is going to allow you to do sort of so much more. In terms of your recovery, again, I haven't really sort of talked about recovery too much, but just to sort of touch on this again, if you have got sort of races coming up, or if you're in like a big training block, um, your recovery, what you eat and drink, sort of post run, post exercise, is going to be really important, really key here as well. So making sure you are incorporating plenty of protein, plenty of carbohydrate, drinking plenty of fluid, and doing this regularly, is going to help there. Again, I haven't really sort of talked about supplements as part of today. Um, just as a again as a reminder, this is probably the area I get most questions on. The supplements industry is worth in the absolute billions. There's new products added to the market every single day, yet probably less than 10. I would actually recommend, based on the fact they have good, strong scientific evidence to back up their claims. Most supplements, they just don't have that sort of structure in place there. So do be aware if you do have any questions on supplements, you're not sure if they're worth using, please do drop me a message and I'd love to help you out with that. And that leads me on to the sort of final point, just in terms of nutrition information and support. There is a lot of misinformation out there, particularly when it comes to nutrition. So, everything I do as an accredited nutritionist, it is evidence based. I have seen a lot of misleading, dangerous information shared on sort of social media, newspapers, Facebook groups, things like that. So that's part of the reason, again, like I say, why I created Fuel the Runner is to help as many runners as possible nail an evidence-based nutrition strategy that's then tailored to them. So just to finish off then, before we take any questions, if you are someone that's looking to enhance your running performance, I've recently launched a what I call Fuel the Runner Nutrition Foundations course. It's a little mini course, and it's basically for runners of all levels and abilities who want to learn how to fuel their runs effectively, how to improve their recovery, how to sort of minimize that risk of hitting things like the wall during their runs. Those that, as I say, just really want to progress their running. And it basically, the course itself is a 30 module course. Each module, there's a short video from myself, so all the videos are no longer than about sort of 10 minutes or so. And I basically cover a whole range of 30 different sort of nutrition topics to support your running performance there. In addition to the course, you then get access to a sort of community of committed runners where you can post questions, share your progress, your feedback. I do sort of regular Q&A sessions as well. So a bit like this, we sort of jump on Zoom and people can sort of share their wins, successes, equally some of their challenges. Um, and then, as part of, as you go through the course, you get access to all these fueling guides, these resources and recipes along the way to further reinforce the learning, further support your running performance there as well. So, if you are interested, if you scan this QR code, and this will take you to the link to sort of sign up and get access to the course. You get access immediately, get access to everything. And just as a sort of added bonus, if you then on the sort of checkout page use the code FUEL10, this will then give you a 10% discount on the code as well. Equally, if you are a runner that is then looking for sort of further help, further support, depending on sort of where you found out about this, do check out the sort of social media pages. So we've got the Instagram page where I share a lot of tips, resources, recipes. Feel free to sort of drop me a DM with any questions. Like I say, lots of runners do that each day, which is great. If you're on Facebook, there's also the sort of Facebook group as well. So again, same thing here. Post any questions that you have as well. And then if you're looking for sort of further help and support, as I've just shared with the nutrition course, it has been very, very popular. It has been very, very effective, and some of the reviews are sort of starting to come in from runners that have completed it. But equally, if you're someone that's looking for, I suppose, more of a one-to-one support, I do have a number of runners that I do work with on an individual basis as well. So if that's something of interest to you, if you've got a big race coming up or a big training block or something else that you're working towards, I'd love to help you achieve that. So feel free to drop me an email, drop me a message on sort of social media, and yeah, we can sort that out another time. So that is pretty much everything from me for this webinar. So I hope that has been useful. As I say, if you are watching this on catch up, please do feel free to drop me a message, either email or social media, whatever you prefer. I'm going to pause I'm going to stop the recording now.